The Trump tariffs, the hidden truth behind Liberation Day, a Rose Garden spectacle. At 2 p.m. on April 2, 2025, President Donald Trump strode into the White House Rose Garden flanked by steelworkers in hard hats and banners reading Liberation Day. Over 18 televised minutes, he signed a trio of executive orders that created the most sweeping set of import taxes since the Smoot-Hawley era. A 10% universal tariff on every good entering U.S. borders, starting April 5. A sector-specific schedule that piles 25% on autos, 34% on Chinese merchandise, 20% on most EU goods, and an array of harsher surcharges on semiconductors, critical minerals, and pharmaceuticals that phase in by April 9. Reporters noted the pageantry, hats flung into the crowd, a gospel choir singing "Proud to be an American." But beneath the theater sat a blunt economic instrument whose costs will be paid at home. PBS The Washington Post Tariff Mechanics: Why the Check Comes from Cleveland, Not Guangzhou. Tariffs may target foreign producers, yet at the loading dock, an American importer writes the check. Customs brokers add the duty to the landed cost. Wholesalers and retailers pass on as much as the market bears. Analyses of the 2018-2020 trade war showed that nearly 100% of steel and aluminum tariffs became higher U.S. prices within months, a pattern the Congressional Budget Office, the New York Fed, and independent academics all confirmed. The 2025 package is simply larger, so there is no credible path by which foreigners absorb the bill. Every economist interviewed by PBS, from Moody's chief Mark Zandi to former CEA chair Jason Furman, offered the same two-word verdict: consumers pay. PBS 3, immediate sticker shock at the checkout. Groceries and household essentials. Roughly 41% of fresh fruit, 34% of clothing, and close to 90% of consumer electronics sold in the United States are imported. A flat 10% duty on that flow translates, once inventories cycle, into shelf price hikes of about 2 to 4%, according to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, PIIE. Their micro-simulation places the average annual hit at $2,600 per median household, dwarfing the benefit many families received from the 2024 tax rebate program. PIIE Autos: the 25% car levy lands with surgical cruelty on Detroit's global supply chains. The Center for Automotive Research calculates an extra $6,800 on a mid-sized sedan assembled in the Midwest and nearly $9,400 on a light truck once tariff components are tallied. Leasing companies already report cancellation waves and lengthening fleet lives as buyers retreat. Pharmaceuticals and medical devices: over half of U.S. antibiotics and roughly 70% of generic drug precursors come from abroad. Hospitals project a $32 billion jump in annual procurement costs that will flow into insurance premiums by next renewal season. 4. Inflation's second wind. Moody's Analytics feeds the tariff matrix into its macro model and finds that consumer price inflation rises about 1.8 percentage points above baseline by Q4 2025, erasing almost all the Federal Reserve's post-pandemic disinflation gains. Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin told Axios he expects the pass-through to start showing up around June as inventories turn, warning that the central bank may have to choose between rate hikes and a recession or tolerating the price surge. Axios. 5. Supply chain whiplash: ports, rails, and warehouses in freefall. Ports are the economy's early warning seismographs. Within 3 weeks of Liberation Day, container bookings from China to U.S. coast terminals plunged 45%. Reuters tallied at least 6 trans-Pacific loops that liner companies simply canceled, while forwarders scrambled to find backhaul cargo for empty boxes. Reuters, the Financial Times, confirms the Port of Los Angeles is bracing for a 1/3 drop in arrivals, and air freight bookings are off 30%. Financial Times. The human side appears in Axios dispatches from Long Beach and Seattle. Dock workers faced reduced shifts, truckers sat idle, and regional warehouse landlords offered 1-month rent holidays to stem vacancies. Economists warn that when logistics workers lose overtime, retail inventory thins and consumer choice narrows, amplifying the price spike. Axios 6 jobs, 3 models, 1 grim consensus. The Penn-Wharton budget model estimates the April tariff package will destroy about 460,000 jobs in 2025 and leave payrolls 1.2 million short after 5 years, once higher production costs ripple downstream and foreign retaliation bites. Penn Wharton Budget Model. The Yale Budget Lab, running a separate general equilibrium simulation, projects roughly 670,000 first-year job losses and a $500,000 deficit by 2030 as capital spending sags. The Budget Lab at Yale Moody's Analytics chief Mark Zandi pegs the initial hit at about 500,000 positions, heavily concentrated in logistics, retail, and export agriculture, and warns that a second wave could follow if the Fed tightens. PBS notably, the sectors the White House means to protect, steel, aluminum, textiles, employ fewer than 200,000 Americans combined, far less than the number at risk in transport, warehousing, and downstream manufacturing. 7. Output and the R word. Advanced GDP figures already hint at trouble. The economy contracted 0.7% annualized in Q1 2025, the first decline in 3 years, driven by collapsing net exports and a tariff-induced inventory drawdown. Penn Wharton places real GDP a 0.9% below baseline by end 2025, an output gap of roughly $260 billion. Penn Wharton Budget Model. The IMF's April World Economic Outlook warns that America's protectionist turn raises the probability of a global recession by 1/3 because supply chains are now too interwoven for unilateral walls. IMF gross tariff collections will be large. Treasury staff project about $520 billion a year if import volumes hold. Yet Penn Wharton's dynamic scoring shows that once slower growth crimps income tax receipts and retaliatory measures shrink export sales, the net fiscal gain dissipates to barely $1.1 trillion over a decade, only 1/5 of the headline figure. In essence, the policy trades invisible income taxes for highly visible price hikes at the register. 9. Global blowback. Beijing answered within 48 hours, 40% tariffs on U.S. soybeans, corn, and LNG, plus targeted duties on Boeing aircraft parts. Brussels followed with a €23 billion retaliatory list aimed at tech services and bourbon. Yahoo Finance India doubled motorcycle tariffs to 100%, a direct slap at Harley-Davidson's Wisconsin plant. Moody's now forecasts 14% fewer aircraft exports and a 19% hit to U.S. farm sales over 2 years. Where 2019's Phase 1 deal nudged agricultural exports upward, the 2025 reprisals erased those gains in a single planting season. 10. Who bears the brunt? A regressive tax in drag. The Yale Budget Lab crunched distributional numbers and found that households in the second lowest income decile lose 2.3% of disposable income from the April 2nd package alone, compared with a 0.9% hit for the top decile. When all 2025 tariffs and retaliation are stacked together, the gap widens, 4.0% versus 1.6%. In dollar terms, that is $1,700 per low-income household versus $8,100 at the top. But as a share of earnings, the pain is far more severe for working families. The Budget Lab at Yale. Farm communities sit at the intersection of higher input costs, tractor parts, fertilizer, and lost export markets, soy, sorghum. USDA economists estimate a $1,900 decline in net farm income per family for the 2025 marketing year, wiping out the entire margin of last season's profits. 11. Case study, autos and the Rust Belt. Detroit relies on foreign content for roughly half of powertrain components. A quarter tariff on finished vehicles and key parts forces manufacturers into a grim trilemma: swallow margins, raise showroom prices, or embark on an expensive reshoring crusade. The Center for Automotive Research's base case, unit sales down 12%, yields 90,000 direct auto layoffs within 18 months, with twice as many jobs lost among suppliers and dealerships. Strategically, the U.S. risks ceding ground in the very electric vehicle race it hopes to win, as Japanese and Korean rivals pivot production to tariff-free plants in Mexico and Canada. 12 case study, West Coast logistics, Los Angeles and Long Beach process about 45% of U.S.-China container trade. Liner cancellations and blank sailings documented by Reuters, the Financial Times, and multiple port authorities mean dock workers already average 18 hours less a week than a year ago. The International Longshore and Warehouse Union warns of 12,000 layoff notices if volume fails to rebound by summer. Those losses cascade into trucking, rail, and warehousing jobs in lower-income zip codes, many of which never fully recovered from the pandemic downturn. Reuters, Financial Times, Axios long-term competitiveness at risk protection can briefly shelter legacy industries, but it raises input costs for innovative sectors like electric vehicles, AI hardware, and biopharma that depend on globally optimized supply chains. Each extra tariff dollar on circuit boards is a dollar diverted from R&D or engineering headcount. The IMF estimates sustained protectionism shaves 0.15 percentage points off total factor productivity growth annually, small in a single year, fatal over a decade. Venture investors already complain that variable tariff schedules make cost forecasting impossible, nudging them toward Europe or East Asia. IMF 14 rhetoric versus reality, 5 claims debunked. Foreigners will pay the tariff. Border tax incidence studies show U.S. importers pay nearly the entire duty, and retailers pass it through to consumers. PBS, tariffs will cure the trade deficit. The deficit flows from the savings investment gap. Tariffs may widen it if a stronger dollar crimps exports. Penn-Wharton simulations see only marginal improvement even under rosy assumptions. Penn-Wharton budget model. Tariffs create jobs. Every independent model, Wharton, Yale, Moody's, shows net job losses scaling from 500,000 to 500,000. Penn-Wharton budget model, the budget lab at Yale, PBS tariffs curb inflation. Moody's and the Richmond Fed expect the new duties to add roughly 2 percentage points to CPI. Axios, allies won't retaliate. The EU, China, India, and others filed detailed counter schedules within a week, totaling more than $200 billion in targeted duties. Yahoo Finance. Why do tariffs persist despite grim numbers? Because benefits are concentrated. A steel mill saves 500 jobs, while costs are diffused across 330 million consumers. The steel lobby can finance campaigns. A family paying an extra $19 at Walmart cannot. Add a populist narrative of economic sovereignty and it becomes electorally attractive, even if economically perverse. That dynamic explains why protectionist eras tend to last until a crisis. Think 1930s Smoot-Hawley, forces reversal. 16. The outlook, stagflation, fiscal strain, and strategic drift. Base case, 60% probability. GDP growth flirts with zero through mid-2026, unemployment breaches 5%, and CPI sits near 5%. Mild stagflation, recession scenario 40%. 2 negative quarters, a 20% equity drawdown, widening federal deficit despite tariff receipts, and emergency Fed easing that collides with sticky prices. Global systemic risk. If tit-for-tat duties fragment the WTO framework, the post-1994 era of rules-based trade could fracture into regional blocs, reducing U.S. leverage exactly when emerging tech standards are being written elsewhere. Conclusion. The heavy price of liberation. Liberation Day promised freedom from foreign dependence. The balance sheet reality is a self-imposed tax that lands hardest on the workers and households it claimed to champion. Prices rise. Jobs slip away at the docks and down the supply chain. Exporters lose markets built over decades. The Fed's inflation battle resets to square one, and America's fiscal position barely improves once growth slows. Strategic protection can be a tool if narrowly deployed and time-limited. The April 2025 tariff tsunami is neither. It is a broad consumption tax wrapped in nationalist branding, enacted without parallel investments in competitiveness or workforce upskilling. History suggests such walls collapse under their own economic weight. The sooner policymakers face the hidden truth behind Liberation Day, the smaller the final invoice for U.S. citizens, and for a global trading system already under strain.